So talk to me a little bit about how you coped as you were going through this process.
Well, I've been doing yoga now for like 25 years. There wasn't a studio near me when I first moved out of the city and into the suburbs. And fortunately, in I think probably a year and a half before all of this started, a new yoga studio opened 3 miles from my house. So I started going, taking classes, and when all of this started to happen, I started going every day. And that was incredibly helpful for 2 reasons. One, because I find when I do yoga, if I listen to the instructor and really focus on what I'm supposed to be doing in every pose, I stop thinking and I just focus on what my body is supposed to be doing. So in a way, it's sort of like a meditation because it takes you out of yourself. And then the other part was at the end, when you're in Shavasana, I could really just let my emotions go. And often I would just cry, just quietly, just release. And it would be safe for me to do that there. I wasn't in front of any of my family members or my employer or anything. And that became the most important thing for me in terms of coping, because then I would take the breathing and the thoughtfulness around all that with me into the rest of the day. And sometimes I would think I was coping very well, I could go back to that moment in the day when I figured out I actually wasn't coping as well. There was one day when I went to yoga and I finished and I was searching frantically for my car keys and I couldn't find them, and I went out to the car and it had been running for the entire hour and a half that I was in yoga, because I was just so excited to get to yoga and get to that place that I just jumped out of the car and left it running.
So Mimi, your experience leaving your car keys in the car and the car running expresses a lot of times what happens when we're in a place of distress or maybe great sadness. We find ourselves doing things that we might not normally do. How do you find the practice helped you kind of come out of those situations or become more aware of what you were doing in any given moment?
Yeah, I think that it just helped me to acknowledge that I really needed to stick with the practice. The idea that I would leave my car running was a signal to me that I was actually more stressed than I wanted to admit I was. And it just reaffirmed my conviction that this was the one thing that was really, in the course of every day, important for me to do. And I took a class where they taught you a home practice so that I could do it on the weekends when I couldn't as easily get to yoga. And I went on a retreat, which was extremely helpful because it just helped me to think, I think for some people maybe it's like religion or whatever. It's like if wherever you can go where you can have that quiet, where you can reflect, where you really give yourself permission to reflect and go inside and think while you're working on yourself, because we avoid it.
You mentioned loneliness earlier, and really this experience of feeling very alone, even if your husband was still in the picture.
Right.
How did you kind of use yoga to help you cope with the loneliness factor?
Well, I think it's interesting. I feel in a yoga studio, and I really only like to practice in a yoga studio and not at a gym. I feel that there's no judgment in the room. I really feel like people are there trying to just do their own practice. There's not a sense of competition. So you feel like you're part of a community in that time that you're in that room. And I don't mean that I went there looking to make friends. And I don't even though I see a lot of people the same day, day after day, and I'll say hello and be pleasant, it's not like we're trying to become each other's friends outside of that studio. So it helps you don't feel isolated and in that regard. So I felt like it provided me with a sense of community, even though, and it helped to alleviate the sense of loneliness in that space.
What would you recommend to somebody who's never done the yoga practice before but is experiencing the difficulty of going through breaking up with a loved one?
Right. Well, I think the important thing is to find whatever is going to work for you, to find the space in your day. For some people love to run, for example, or go to the gym or whatever. But I think the great thing about yoga is that it's something you can do at any age and regardless of what kind of shape you're in. And you can just try it. And the best thing, I think, one of the yoga teachers I had would say when we would try to do a pose, he would say, and now, if it's available to you, you know, stand this way or put your arm this way or whatever. And so it's the idea that it's up to you how far you want to push, and the idea that there's always going to be further you can go into any pose. So you can start at a very basic place and know that that's where everybody started, and that you'll move through it, and you may stay in that place a very long time. But it's not like you have to feel that if you can't do it right off the bat, that's, you know, you shouldn't try. You should always try, because you really can enter at any level. And there's some poses that I'm convinced I will never ever be able to do, but I still try and do them if they come up in the class, because how will I know unless I try?
What a lovely metaphor. I mean, I think starting yoga sounds exactly like starting the process of going through a breakup, right? From that day one, you all start at the same place, heartbroken, gut-wrenching, and then it's up to you how you progress.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of different paths, and you may progress faster or slower, but progress is really how you define it.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
So you had mentioned wanting to live the rest of your life in a happy place. So I know that you've moved on.
Mm-hmm.
Your divorce is now complete.
Right.
You've used yoga to help you heal the process of going through the divorce and kind of the aftermath of the divorce.
Right.
Where are you now?
Well, I'm very happy. I'm remarried to a wonderful guy who is very supportive. And, you know, I mentioned about going on that retreat. And when I first got there, I was able to go and have a massage to start. And the woman who was working on me said, you know, was asking me questions about tension, and she could feel it in my body. And she said, you know, I'm sensing that you have an opportunity to make a change, to break a pattern. And that put a thought into my head about my mother and her relationship with my dad and my grandmother and this line of women. It's all women in my family, basically. And I resolved, and you know, when you start yoga, they say, you know, set an intention. And so I set an intention for a very long time of not having to go back to the same pattern, to really look at what my responsibility is in a relationship. What did I allow to go on for longer than it should have, out of fear, out of convenience, out of just feeling like, you know, as they say, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. And so by continuing with my practice and following that intention, I feel like I'm in a very different relationship where I managed to avoid some of those same patterns, and because the man that I'm with also was divorced and had issues in his relationship that he wanted to be sure weren't repeated. We, you know, talk very differently and work very differently on being sure that we keep each other happy and take responsibility for our own happiness. So I'm very lucky. I really am.
I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.